Hello, and thanks for stopping by. Every year, millions of tourists pass through Westminster, the heart of British government, to marvel at the Palace of Westminster, Westminster Abbey, Horse Guards Parade, and to hear the mighty big bell bend chime. Yet hidden amongst these famous landmarks are many details most people simply walk straight past. From relics of the Second World War and traces of medieval Westminster to curious monuments, overlooked street furniture, and echoes of some of Britain's most dramatic moments. In this video, I'd like to share some of these fascinating sights with you. The Westminster that nobody notices. It's difficult to imagine nowadays, but many centuries ago, going back to Roman and Anglo-Saxon times, the area now occupied by the Palace of Westminster, Parliament Square and Westminster Abbey was a marshy island known as Thorney Island, a name which survives today with Thorney Street, which runs between Millbank and Horseferry Road. Thorney Island existed at a time when the Thames was significantly wider, with smaller streams branching off to create the enclave. This long wall, the Westminster Abbey Precinct Wall, which runs along Great College Street, is medieval, and believe it or not, it used to face the water. Close by is another survivor of medieval Westminster, the Jewel Tower, which was built in the 1360s as part of the original Palace of Westminster. Like the Westminster Abbey Precinct Wall, it was also once much closer to the Thames, and was even surrounded by a moat, in which old bits of pottery, 17th century wine bottles, and even an Anglo-Saxon sword have been found. Today, the Jewel Tower, which is 3 stories high, is open to the public as a museum. To get an idea of just how wide the Thames once was, head to Victoria Embankment Gardens, behind the Ministry of Defence. Here you'll find Queen Mary Steps, built in 1691 for Queen Mary's residence, as a landing stage for boats. In those days, they led directly down to the river. But when Victoria Embankment was constructed in the 19th century and the Thames was narrowed, they were left stranded some distance from shore. Forgotten for decades, the steps were rediscovered in 1939 during construction of the Ministry of Defence. Whilst we're beside the Thames, it's also worth pointing out the colour scheme of Westminster Bridge, which is painted green, and Lambeth Bridge, which is painted red. There's a specific reason these colours were chosen. They reflect the main debating chambers within Parliament itself, the House of Commons, with its distinctive green benches, and the House of Lords, where the seating, which it must be said looks far comfier, is traditionally red. The northwestern steps up to Westminster Bridge, meanwhile, are home to this unusual copper turret. This is the Thames Tide Recorder, which, as the name suggests, contains equipment for measuring the height of the river. It's been here since at least the 1930s and continues to play an important maritime role, transmitting data every 15 minutes to the Thames Barrier Control Room further downriver. Over the years, Westminster has borne witness to some pretty gruesome events. This is Old Palace Yard, sited between Westminster Abbey and the Palace of Westminster. Old Palace Yard used to be a residential street, a sense of which you can still gain from the surviving Georgian houses. It was here, in January 1606, that 4 of the Gunpowder Plotters, who'd attempted to assassinate King James I in a failed attempt to blow up Parliament in November 1605, were hauled before a large crowd for their executions, which, with their crimes being treason, meant being hung, drawn and quartered. In other words, dragged to the site by a horse, hung from the neck until not quite dead, then disemboweled whilst still conscious. The 4 men who met their dreadful fate here were Thomas Wintour, Ambrose Rookwood, Robert Keyes, and, most famously, Guy Fawkes. Guy had one more trick up his sleeve though. As the noose was slipped over his head for the hanging stage of the process, he suddenly leapt from the scaffold, breaking his neck and killing himself instantly. Another nasty execution occurred on the 30th of January 1649, when King Charles I was beheaded on a scaffold outside the banqueting house on Whitehall. A statue of Charles I, just south of Trafalgar Square, looks towards the spot. As well as marking the very centre of London, the point from which all distances to and from the capital are measured, this statue of King Charles is also of note in that it appears in the first known photograph ever taken of London, a ghostly image that was captured way back in 1839. There are several other little nods to Charles I's death. This small bust outside the banqueting house marks the approximate spot where he lost his head, and directly opposite, above Horse Guards Parade, there's a clock which has a small black mark placed above 2 p.m. being the exact time the executioner's axe fell. Further down, opposite Parliament, there's another bust of Charles I, who's staring directly across at a statue of his arch nemesis, Oliver Cromwell. Another statue you can see outside the Palace of Westminster is this one, representing Richard I, aka Richard the Lionheart. This was created in 1851 for the Great Exhibition, and was initially displayed at the huge Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. Although it would appear it wasn't very well made, for the horse's tail dropped off on the first day. The statue is tougher than you might expect though. In the Second World War, a bomb exploded very close to him, and so powerful was the blast, it lifted Richard and his trusty steed completely off their plinth. Sticking with World War II, if you head to Lord North Street, you'll find 2 ghost signs pointing the way to former air raid shelters, which were once tucked beneath the pavement. Number 5 Lord North Street is also of interest. Although 10 Downing Street is the official residence of the Prime Minister, 1 PM Harold Wilson didn't fancy staying there during his second term. He claimed living at number 10 was akin to being in a goldfish bowl, and so, during his second stint as Prime Minister, which ran from 1974 to 1976, he opted to live here instead. He still didn't have far to travel to work though. Something else of interest on Lord North Street is this green plaque, marking the former home of William Thomas Stead, a journalist and newspaper editor who perished in the Titanic disaster. What makes Stead's story especially eerie is that it published 2 fictional stories in the 19th century detailing disasters at sea, one involving a ship striking an iceberg, the other warning about the dangers of insufficient lifeboats. Returning to more bloody matters, this is Cockpit Steps, an alley which links Birdcage Walk to Old Queen Street. The name is pretty much literal, for the steps here did indeed once lead down to a cockpit, one of those nasty, grubby venues where the savage sport, in inverted commas, of cockfighting took place. The one based here was aimed at a higher class clientele, who'd bet large sums of money on the vicious fights. If you pay close attention to the brickwork on Cockpit Steps, you'll notice some old graffiti scratched in, mainly letters and numbers. These appear to be police collar numbers, carved out in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by board constables who were stationed here on night duty, in a manner similar to the better known policeman's wall on Islington's Middleton Passage. Up near Parliament Square, meanwhile, is a small street called Little Sanctuary, on which you can see this unassuming stone gateway. This structure, which dates from the 17th century, is in fact the only surviving remnant of a jail which once stood nearby, the Tothill Fields Bridewell, which housed inmates between 1618 and 1836. Westminster Tube Station, which was greatly enlarged in the 1990s with the Jubilee Line extension, is an impressive piece of architecture. Many passengers don't realise it, but as you traverse the escalators, you are in fact passing directly through the foundations of Portcullis House, a large office complex for members of Parliament which sits directly above. The other station serving Westminster is St James's Park, which is also topped by a large building. In this case, 55 Broadway, which was built in the 1920s to serve as the main headquarters for London Underground. Although 55 Broadway isn't easy to miss, some of its finer details are often overlooked, such as the tiny 1920s tube roundels high up on the drain pipes. Then there are the Art Deco reliefs, sculpted by Jacob Epstein, which were highly controversial when first unveiled, so much so that they ended up being tarred and feathered. Something else which isn't so obvious about 55 Broadway, not from the ground at least, is that it's shaped like a crucifix, thus making it a modern counterpart to nearby Westminster Abbey. It isn't only trains which run beneath Westminster. Being the centre of government, there are, as you may well expect, numerous secret bunkers and tunnels lurking below ground too. The main bunker, designed for accommodating officials in national emergencies, up to and including nuclear attack, is located deep beneath Whitehall. Understandably, due to security, very little information about the bunker is available to the public. One thing that is known though, is that the bunker is codenamed Pindar. This is a reference to the ancient Greek poet Pindar. When Alexander the Great destroyed the city of Thebes in 335 BC, he spared Pindar's home, apparently because he was a fan of the poet's work, meaning it was one of the only buildings left standing in the rubble after the Macedonian attack. A subtle hint of Westminster's secret underground labyrinth can be seen hiding in plain sight outside the QE2 Conference Centre, opposite Westminster Abbey. Namely, these two round structures, which are air vents connected to a network of Cold War era tunnels dubbed Q Whitehall. A secure entrance to Q Whitehall is rumoured to exist just under half a mile from here, within a telephone exchange on Craig's Court, a forgotten little square tucked away off the northern end of Whitehall. But I didn't tell you that, okay? The Q Whitehall ventilation shafts lay either side of a small green space known as United Nations Green, so called because the very first session of the United Nations was held opposite in Methodist Central Hall in January 1946. It was also from Methodist Central Hall in 1966 that the World Cup trophy was famously stolen. I recently made an entire video devoted to that story, which I'll link below. Sitting in the middle of Smith Square is this grand building, the former St John's Church, which now serves as a concert hall. From its earliest days, this church was nicknamed Queen Anne's Footstool. Legend has it that when the architect asked Queen Anne how she wanted the new church to look, she tipped over a footstool and said, "Like that." If true, Queen Anne sadly never got to see the completed church. She passed away in 1714, yet construction didn't finish until 1728. Charles Dickens, meanwhile, had a different view of St John's. In his final completed novel, Our Mutual Friend, published in the 1860s, he describes the church as being very hideous, resembling a petrified monster, frightful and gigantic, on its back with its legs in the air. A small statue of Queen Anne can be seen on Queen Anne's Gate, which has an air of mystery about it, for its sculptor is unknown. The statue was completed during Anne's lifetime, but local children mistook it for Queen Mary I, aka Bloody Mary, and so delighted in chucking stones at it. According to local folklore, it's said this statue climbs down from its plinth once a year, on the 1st of August, the anniversary of Queen Anne's death, and walks up and down the street. Although if this were true, I'm sure we'd have some CCTV footage of it by now. If that wasn't creepy enough, look up at the Georgian properties around Queen Anne's Gate, and you'll see the keystones have an array of faces poking out of them. Yet another quirky feature on Queen Anne's Gate can be seen outside number 26. This funnel-shaped object is an old lamp snuffer. Back in the days before gaslighting became commonplace, wealthy folk could hire a so-called link boy to walk them home after dark with a torch. Upon arrival, the link boy could then use this contraption to extinguish the flame. You can see another lamp snuffer on Cowley Street, a road which also bears this old street sign dating from 1722. There's a similar sign around the corner too, on Barton Street. These aren't the oldest street signs in Westminster though. Another vintage sign can be seen preserved outside the Home Office on Marsham Street. This one dates from 1688. Just around the corner from Marsham Street are St John's Gardens, which if you approach from the south side on Page Street, you'll notice are raised above ground level. There's a grim reason for this. The gardens used to be a burial ground connected to St John's Church, which we saw earlier. During the 18th and 19th centuries, St John's graveyard became one of the most densely packed in London, meaning the land and bodies had to be piled up to create more space. One of the most notable burials here occurred in 1734, when a Native American chief, who died of smallpox whilst visiting England, was laid to rest here in a manner befitting the traditions of his tribe, his body being sewn up in blankets and adorned with glass beads and silverware. Sadly though, his name has been long lost to time. Although Westminster Abbey is, quite rightly, a major tourist attraction, many people, in their rush to see it, miss two other sites close by. First is Dean's Yard, a quiet and very beautiful quadrangle, which is free to access, and from which you can acquire a more unusual view of the Abbey itself. You can access it via either the sanctuary, close to the main entrance for Westminster Abbey, or around to the back on the corner of Tufton Street and Great College Street. Also beside Westminster Abbey is St Margaret's Church, which can trace its history back to the 12th century. The current building dates largely from the 1520s. Winston Churchill was married here, and Uluda Equiano, whose autobiography about his years as a slave played a key role in the abolitionist movement, was baptised here in 1759. The exterior of St Margaret's Church has a feature that almost everyone seems to miss. This window, which if you look closely, you'll notice isn't real. It's painted on. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tour of the Westminster Nobody Notices, and as always, I'd love to hear your own thoughts. Did you know about any of these curiosities? And are there any other hidden secrets around here that you know of? If so, please be sure to let me know in the comments. If you haven't yet subscribed to Rob's London, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, will ensure you don't miss out whenever I publish a new video. Plus of course, it'd be wonderful to have you along. Clicking the hype button is a huge help too. And if you want to stay updated between videos, please check out the community tab. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip, using either the YouTube thanks button, which can be found beneath the video, or via my Ko-fi account, which I'll link in the description. Any such donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well and please be sure to stay tuned.